Make work more human to me is to do what we now have this massive advantage to do, which is to remove parts of our job that are mundane, that are administrative, that are what people call like paper pushing, to remove that from our daily task list because we are free due to automation and the intelligence that AI is bringing us. That means you can leverage people's innate capabilities to the highest and best use.
They keep telling us that it's all over for HR. The age of AI is upon us, and that means HR should be prepared to be decimated. We reject that message. The future of HR won't be handed to us. Instead, it'll be defined by those ready to experiment, adopt, and adapt. Future Proof HR invites these builders to share what they're trying, how it's going, what they've learned, and what's next. We are committed to arming HR with the AI insights to not just survive, but to thrive. Hello and welcome to the Future Proof HR podcast, where we explore how forward-thinking HR leaders are preparing for disruption and redefining what it means to lead people in a changing world. I'm your host, Thomas Kunjappu, CEO of Cleary. Today's guest is Sabrina Sdao, Chief Growth Officer at Thursday Strategy. Prior to Thursday, Sabrina spent over a decade at Deloitte as a corporate strategist. Sabrina now helps organizations navigate workplace transformation with a focus on human-centric growth. She believes AI and automation are powerful tools, not threats, if we rethink how we upskill people and design for creativity and not just efficiency. Sabrina, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Thomas.
So let's jump right into the skills question. So what do you think? What are the skills that are going to be most important for workers, especially given the pace of change in AI and in the workplace overall?
Yeah, I think skills is a hot word right now when it comes to workforce strategy. And if I had to name what I think the single most important skill is for all workers to have, whether you're the CEO or the CHRO or the HRBP or the person on the front line, it's adaptability. I think everyone should be asking themselves, how can I continue to learn and grow and adapt given this wave of change and the impact that AI is going to have on work? I think people are scared of AI, scared that it's going to take over their jobs, etc. I think the way that I see it is that AI has this immense capability to take on mundane tasks with greater accuracy and speed. And what that can mean for people is that it can really unleash their human potential even more so. And now, if they're being bogged down by things that could truly be better done potentially through automation. And this skill of adaptability isn't new. I think as humans, technology has changed so much. I think about the advent of the Industrial Revolution or the introduction of the internet. We adapted in all of those different instances. In both cases, some things changed about existing jobs and new jobs were created. I think this will be much the same. And there's really unique ways that companies are showing adaptability and also engaging their workers to be adaptable. One cool example is with IKEA. What they did was they used bots in their contact center to create efficiencies and streamline their operations, which freed up capacity for people that were previously answering phones. And what they did was they upskilled those people to be interior designers and then transitioned them into a revenue driving role in the organization where they were actually advising clients on how to design their homes and which furniture to buy from the IKEA selection. And I cite that example because in order to do that, you have to have people who are willing to learn and a company that's willing to change and evolve. And when those two things come together, I think that people can inherently be more creative and human.
Uh, Before we dive into that a little bit deeper, I think I want to just acknowledge you're answering this other deeper question within this, which is that there's this emotion of fear that is pretty prevalent at this particular moment, with the changes being more rapid and being more seen as a threat. And this is an interesting story because there's reskilling, and you're right. It's both corporate vision as well as employee willingness to grow and adapt and learn in this case. What do you think that means for the opportunities for many other companies out there as they're thinking about reskilling?
I think what that means is there has to be a culture around adaptability. Cultures are formed through behaviors. Behaviors occur because they are incented and you need to create that culture of adaptability. And that starts from the top of your organization with leaders taking on using AI. It starts with your entry level employees coming in with that natural hunger and zeal for learning and them being adaptable. I think, this podcast is about future proofing HR. And so I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about what I think this means for HR. And I think HR can be a big lever for this change in an organization. Not only can they use these AI tools to improve efficiency and remove some of the mundane work that they do so that an HRBP, for example, has the capacity to really elevate their game and be that true partner and advisor to a business group head or, a head of technology. But it also means that by doing so, HR can truly steward this change across the organization and can build in adaptability and more specifically, adoption of AI, which I think is what I mean by adaptability here.
That's the current example of the meta skill that is, I think, what you're saying, which is adaptability, and you're exhibiting that in the workforce, or in this example, as an HRBP by, for example, leveraging AI in your toolkit. So, yeah, tell me more about how HR can adapt in this world.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that HR by adopting these tools and demonstrating the case for the efficiency that it creates, it can free up their capacity to get deeper into the businesses and the functions so that they can help inform the use cases for these tools across the organization. Because I think what's happening right now is that HR is sort of being included in the conversation, but after the business or the function has taken off with AI and its own use cases and applications. And while that may seem natural, I think there is an opportunity for them to get in front of it a little bit more or to work alongside the business or technology while they are adopting these tools. The way that functions and business think about these tools is let's create operational efficiency, and they do that. But with AI more than ever, we're tapping into deep work disruption. And the sooner HR is a part of that conversation, the more likely the business and functions are to realize the full utility of AI. And what I mean by that is imagine working more closely with your HR business partner on task disruption given applications of certain AI tools and then them being able to take the lens of how do we redesign this job given all these tasks that have been disrupted. And when we redesign 10, 20, 30 jobs, and then we look at how many of those jobs are dispersed across the entire workforce in that business or function, how does that better inform strategic workforce planning for the business? And then what is the case that needs to be made for the group CFO, for example, on how to shift costs associated with headcount and account for the new costs associated with technology and what's that offset? So there's a really great opportunity by HR demonstrating using these tools, establishing or freeing up some of their capacity and really digging deep into the business and functions to say, we've done this or we know what this can do to your jobs and we have all the tools to redesign your workforce to better meet your needs today given this tech disruption.
You're using the word disruption and saying it's deeper and distinct from prior kind of changes. So, let me just cook up an example. Like, maybe in yesteryear, there might be a CFO in their finance org. They're decided that they're going to start using one piece of software for accounting versus another piece of software. Maybe that HRBP who is working with that finance function probably doesn't need to go too deep into the differences in one software versus another. But in this case, when you're going not just to that perfunctory level, you're actually going down to, I think you said the task is being disrupted as well, right? The tasks itself would be changing. And so in this case, are you arguing that HRBP needs to understand that business process even more deeply than my previous example where you went from one accounting software to another to
I
add
think
value?
I think that if we take a step back and just think about the difference in the technologies, like AI is mimicking human intelligence. And I think what, prior tools or big technology systems are doing is they're like more so organizing information and making it more accessible. And that's the big shift. And it's not to say that in those periods of transformation where you're implementing a big finance piece of software, it didn't change the work. I think it did change the work, but I think what we're seeing now is some tasks may be taken on entirely by AI, and I do think that's fundamentally a bit more disruptive than what we've seen with prior tools. So that's why I think there's this deeper opportunity now for HR to be more involved in how AI is being applied to work so that they can rapidly be redesigning jobs and we can start to achieve those efficiencies that the CEOs are expecting. Um, we know there's a bit of a wait and see happening right now from executive teams on just how effective AI is going to be to improve efficiencies of work in organizations and free up capacity. So I'm optimistic. I think HR can play a key role there if they're not already. And what we see sometimes is because this is functionally or business led. For example, with one organization I worked with, they prioritize building sandboxes around using AI tools, the AI coding tools, along with a chat GPT tool, like their own version. They prioritized it within the technology group. It was led by technology. And the HRBP kind of came along for the ride. I just think that if we put them more at the center, then we can realize, codify what these task disruption is and realize the impact perhaps sooner.
So, what is hindering? Because you said, and it's not universal, but that's a great example there. But what do you think is hindering HR from being part of that or informing the AI transformation that's happening at so many workplaces?
I think it's really natural for business leaders within the organization to want to test and experiment with these tools and for them to view it as a way to, improve customer service, let's say,
Their
or
remit, their function. Yeah.
pardon me?
To improve their remit. Like that's their core remit as a head of customer success or whatever function.
100%. And naturally, the train can start to leave the station if representatives from HR aren't a part of that initial thinking because of the way business leaders are incented. And I think that naturally business leaders will understand their use cases to a degree of depth that an advisor doesn't always. And so I put the HRBP into this advisor role. And that's what's hindered them in the past. Just the nature of the way business decision making occurs. I've seen it working with organizations. I worked with an organization to help them better enable their frontline sales team, and HR wasn't at the table. And that wasn't even an AI application so much as it was an assessment of like what skills, characteristics, and behaviors make your people most successful and what do they need to enable them. And it's just sometimes in a very large organization, things like that can happen. All that being said, I do think that there's a great opportunity for them to be more involved.
So I guess it is organization to organization, but those stories that you mentioned are not uncommon. And it makes me wonder out loud, is that just and right? Is the role for HR maybe that is the role, right? You need to actually be in the background and kind of focus on the core outcomes that HR typically does anyway. In this case, job descriptions and career laddering and these kind of the recruiting process and just how you would evolve all of those in responding to what the business leader needs. You're just like the execution arm of driving that strategy. Is that potentially a more natural home or in terms of being effective as a partner organization?
So I think having things be business led makes a ton of sense. I think more at a higher level, I wonder if there's just a degree of governance that needs to be put in place to ensure that what if the decision is made in one business to eliminate all jobs? Like I'm making a dramatic
Hmm.
case, right? Um, and HR is not at the table, and the implications of that haven't been evaluated from the talent strategy and the people side of the business, or something's been overlooked because in establishing a pipeline of future employees because a business decision's been made about a belief regarding the degree to which AI can actually take on internships or entry level jobs, for example. There are some big swings that I think business leaders can make, and and a lot of organizations haven't quite established like what is that governance structure around some of these choices. And so the business must be at the table, of course. I think there's probably a bit of ethics here as well on what is it that we are replacing human work with, and have we put the right safeguards in place to actually have humans still be in the loop when using some of these tools, which we know the tools just aren't good enough yet. And so that's still an important part of this. And what does that mean for the structure of your workforce? How are we thinking about future proofing the business given human capacity in the future? And I do think that HR does help play that role. Maybe in some cases, what we're seeing is so incremental that people are questioning, why the business can't just go ahead, and the business can and they will. I just think there's value in HR being part of it. And we could be taking much bigger swings. And if no one else is at the table to call out the challenges that we could face in the future by doing so, there just could be a cost to having to reverse some of those decisions, or you're not going to achieve the broader buy-in from the organization if they're made in a silo.
Specifically around the reskilling example, for example, that you had about IKEA, I would imagine if you're going to bring along and try to reskill a giant department into a newer growing division, that is a massive change management and learning and development exercise that takes significant coordination. Not to mention, you don't want this dislocation in productivity that could stretch quarters if you're executing a big shift in approach from people to technology
Mm.
without the right mindset and skill set, which not uniquely, but I think HR leaders typically will bring to the table in spades. But yeah, I love your doomsday thinking. You got to think about these scenarios, like things that can happen when you just go all systems go and just take big swings, as you say. Have you seen any of these, any examples of big reversals in course from companies after going in one direction, whether it was about this particular subproblem of involving HR or not, but just having to go back and forth? Uh, well, for me, certainly, like return to office is the whole thing that comes to mind, where companies have gone back and forth in different ways, different policies. But maybe AI adoption and strategy might be one. There will definitely be stories, right, there of case studies in the future, in this era, maybe, where companies did not navigate it as well as they could have.
Yeah, I think so. I also think that the technology isn't quite there yet. The human intelligence is not quite replicated yet. So I do think what we're seeing that's interesting is with early career workers. And I have some questions around this. You know that early career workers have joined the workforce, call it, they've been in the workforce between 1 to 5 years. And there was one study done on this population in a professional services firm. And what they found was that these workers were using AI. They feel as though it's necessary, it's helping them free up some of their time. They believe it frees them up to do higher value work, and that it's ultimately gonna help advance their career. And so there's a good news story there. And these early career workers they're Gen Z, they're digitally native, they grew up with the internet, they're digitally savvy. The flip side of this, though, is that they're a population of individuals that will not have the same foundational skills as maybe you and I did coming into the workforce. And there's a lot that I learned by sitting in a meeting and listening to not just what people said that you can read in a Gemini note taker, but to see how people interacted with one another, to understand how conflict was resolved or how decisions were actually made. And note taking is a skill beyond just writing things down, but there is this perceived degree of learning around human interaction in the workplace and how things actually get done that I think happens. And some of that might be getting lost if we don't have some of those more junior people in the room. And if we have Gemini taking notes, for example, there's also the fundamentals of data analysis. What does it mean to pull data into a table and draw conclusions on your own? And what kind of brain power do you use to do that? And what sharp skills are you honing? Um, and all of that leads to experience. You made a mistake on an analysis in your second year at your first job, and you'll never forget it. And it was great learning. I think of writing in the same way. Can you structure a strong argument? And what does that mean for your ability to be able to communicate that? And that is a very human skill to be able to communicate ideas. People often learn that through writing. And imagine we have this population of people in their early careers who aren't necessarily getting those opportunities. Instead, they're kind of skipping those foundational skills as some of those tasks are being done by AI. And we're still expecting that someone has to review that work. If you have these early career workers, are you expecting that they're going to be the final review on a piece of content that's been produced by a generative AI tool that could be hallucinating because the technology is not as good yet, and the person that's reviewing it at first pass doesn't have that skill and experience yet. And so we're still relying on senior people, but will those skills ever be developed in that cohort if they don't practice? I'm not negative on us using these tools. I'm bullish on it. If you're not using them, you're behind. But are we really thinking about how we grow and develop some of those core skills in early career workers? And if we don't, then how do they gain that experience otherwise? I think it's an open question that hasn't been solved for yet. And if they're relying on what's produced in the AI tools to inform their experience, then we're creating this vicious circle too. So I don't think the intelligence is there yet. The
Yeah, you're not ready for it yet. You're not ready for it to fully take over and replace humanity. But this discussion reminds me of this concept that every technology brings its own disease to humanity. Once we realized that we could get energy out of coal, pretty soon we had coal workers with bad lungs, right? In the
Mm,
social media era, we've had teenage depression rates and addiction rates on phones go up. But then eventually it takes us a little bit of time to figure it out, recalibrate as a society and get safety tools in place. We're starting to, with phones, let's not bring them into elementary or middle schools. Society converges on some solutions. But I think what you're talking about with this particular generation, they might be the generation that gets hit with the diseases of this particular stage of this technology as it's maturing. But hopefully, but both the education system and also how we do development within companies once they do come in, I think, which is your point, we'll figure out ways to fill those gaps so that they are actually productive. But you could also flip it arguably and say that these workers are coming in having internet native generation. There's folks who are going to be native to using tools. They don't Google stuff. They're chat GPT or Gemini things and getting to some real quick insights with a particular workflow or way of doing things that's natural and faster and maybe has a different type of productivity that the rest of us can learn from as well.
yeah, I think there's so much good here. I want to touch on the disease part because I think there is one danger that there's probably many, but we saw one recently, and I think people using ChatGPT, or generative AI tools for mental health support is definitely a danger in this generation. I think there's eh, that's a big watch out for employers too, right? People are using these tools perhaps for personal reasons, and there's that we need to think about. But on the flip side, there's there is such a benefit to having people in their early careers use these tools. And I think you're right. Like they're wired to do that and grew up with technology. I see Even my 4-year-old asked for his Yoto player this morning. That was the first thing he asked for. It's a little electronic story reader. You put cards in and it reads you a
Oh,
story. And of course, he still loves them reread him stories, but it's this little electronic that he carries around with him, and it's like his version of tech. I didn't know. And that's gonna become more advanced as time goes on, and what I do think this generation does have the opportunity to do, it's not all doom and gloom for them. Like, they could vibe code anything. It's second nature. The job market isn't great for them right now. We know that for many factors, there's volatility in the economy. AI has gotten much better at coding. For example, there's that really famous article in the New York Times this month about how people graduating from computer and data science degrees said they're struggling to find jobs. This generation has so much capability and so much native experience with technology, yet when we've told them that they should be focusing on that and on those skills, now they're being shut down from these six-figure jobs that they were promised, and we're seeing higher unemployment rates amongst computer science and computer engineering majors. They're double that of biology and art history majors. And,
yeah.
I wanna pause because I think we put so much emphasis on some of these technical skills, and realistically, like, the faster that the AI is able to mimic human intelligence, the less relevant those skills are going to be. I had a conversation with someone recently. They run a software engineering outsourcing firm, and they have big questions around what is the future of that profession. And if AI can generate code, and if the code's pretty good and gets to that point and no one really needs to review it, and it doesn't matter how well it's truly written, if that craft has become something that can be done just as well, if not better, from automation, have we wiped out an entire profession? I think there's a mini step in between right now, which is that software engineers are using AI coding tools and it's augmenting their work. And that's also a skill that people in computer science and data science, like undergraduate college programs, they're not learning that in school. So they're having trouble getting jobs because AI is getting a little bit better. The job market's a little bit weak. It's slowing down in at least Canada and the US. And there's some key skills that weren't part of their education that employers are looking for, which is using some of these tools. And while I think this generation is very well equipped to use technology, there's a bit of a hiccup that's happening for some of the folks this generation that have focused so heavily on tech skills. If they haven't also focused on some of those more human skills that are becoming important. So like in the age of AI, like, can you ask an effective question? Can that translates well into prompting, for example,
A human or an LLM?
both, both. Are we raising a generation that's really strong in critical thinking, that can discern when Gen AI is producing something that is incorrect, that's a hallucination? Are we developing skills related to empathy so that we can be better human-centered designers and create better experiences? Because in theory, if AI is taking on all these mundane tasks, we should have more time for improved experiences. And I think people's expectation of experiences is so high because of all the data that's collected on us as consumers. And I could go on, but there's so many human skills that are so important that I just wonder if in this generation, like we might just see a bit of a hiccup and a bit of catch up, maybe, if the emphasis has been so heavily placed on technical skills that I don't know that all people have taken that perspective. I think overall it's good that the Gen Z knows how to use this technology and it can enable them in some ways, but we can't forget the human side of ourselves and what that means to be good workers and good people in society.
This has been a fantastic conversation so far. If you haven't already done so, make sure to join our community. We're building a network of the most forward-thinking HR and people operations professionals who are defining the future. I will personally be sharing news and ideas around how we can all thrive in the age of AI. You can find it at gocleary.com/Cleary-community. Now back to the show. Yeah, it's hard to separate out, at least for the moment. In a couple of years from now, when we're looking back at it, it'll make more sense. Like how much of the current state with the job market, especially for entry level workers, how much of that is driven by the broader economy, where
Mhm.
there is uncertainty and a general pausing, and maybe a lot of companies, relatively speaking, overhiring in a lower interest rate environment in the previous years and just holding steady, versus how much productivity is being gained using AI tools, which makes your mid and senior level career workers more productive, and or take the carrying water tasks that we all had as we first get into the workforce, those being the roles or the tasks that are most quickly replaced by AI. But it's a little bit hard to tell from my vantage point. But that's all, I think, a preamble to, I think, your point about where this is all headed. However, it all shakes out with this hiccup, as you say. You're telling me that you think work needs to be more human, if anything, going forward. What do you mean by that exactly? And how is work not human?
I think work is human. It can be more human. I wanna answer that, but I wanna address what you mentioned about volatility in the economy because I wanna make
Mhm.
sure that I've been clear there. What we're experiencing in the job market right now is very multifaceted. I zeroed in on computer science graduates, for example, because I think it's a fascinating data point, and Gen Z in general, but I think broadly, we're seeing a lot of volatility in the economy. We know that the unemployment rate has slowly climbed in North America, and I center myself on that just because that's a market I know better than others, so I can say that confidently, and that there's 2 things that are happening right now. One is that there's labor hoarding that's happening, so employers, again, in a low interest rate environment, they did hire, a lot more people, and they know from previous experience the cost associated with downsizing, and then when the economy turns again and the pendulum will swing, we know that, that's the economic cycle, that they'll need to hire quickly, right? So we know people have learned from that, so they're labor hoarding, and on the other side of things, people are job hugging. So people don't wanna leave their jobs because they're worried about the volatility in the economy. I think you're right. I cite those 2 kind of examples on the supply and demand side because I think it's a complicated concept, and I don't wanna simplify it to say that, the reason why entry-level workers are having challenges finding jobs with computer science degrees is it's not an absence of that kind of broader picture. It's all connected. To make work more human, to me, is to do what we now have this massive advantage to do, which is to remove parts of our job that are mundane, that are administrative, that are what people call like paper pushing, to remove that from our daily task list because we are free due to automation and the intelligence that AI is bringing us. That means you can leverage people's innate capabilities to the highest and best use. It means that employers need to decide what they're gonna do with that freed up capacity. But to me, there's 2 different ways, and they can both converge. One is inspiring people to innovate for the organization, and the IKEA example is one way that they did that, like, to reapply capacity, upskill people, and they can do something that's inherently more human, which is providing good design advice versus maybe tech support or information on an IKEA return that a client could engage with differently. I think that's like upskilling people. That's giving them growth and development in their career. It's also driving a new stream of revenue for your business. So you can make the workplace more human by giving people a bit more purpose and meaning in their work by doing things that are less mundane and fundamentally more challenging, require critical thinking and creativity. I think that another way that you can make work more human is you can actually leverage the data that we know about people to make their actual experience as an individual, no matter what they're doing, way more tailored to them. We have a really high bar on the experiences that we engage in. Apple, Spotify, Google, they know us so well. Spotify's creating playlists for me based on all my prior behaviors. What if your workplace actually designed your ideal workday based on what you told the system your priorities are and helps you better design your day so that you can maximize your time so that you can then spend time on things that are important to you. Maybe you want to do something for yourself in the evening, or you want to see a friend, or you don't want to cancel plans for the third time, or you want to pick up your kid from school. and you inform your HR information system about your personal needs and your professional needs, and they help steer you based on what they know your goals are and the data that you put into the system. And that data can be your calendar data. It could be your email traffic. It could be the data that you've put into your HRIS about your skills, your capabilities, the career path you want to be on. And that could be combined with whatever professional or personal assessments the business has taken the initiative to take and inform their leaders on. And there's this huge opportunity to make work feel so custom to the individual. And when we see the pendulum swing back, when we see the economy improve, and when we see the job market improve, and when it becomes an employee market versus an employer's market, some of these things are going to make the difference if employers get ahead of it. I think that's strategic HR to actually get ahead of the shift what we will see in the market. Things will change. And I think employers will once again have the power, or employees will have the power. And how do you actually create the circumstance upon which you are competing for top human talent? We won't all be replaced, but some of our mundane tasks will be. That's for sure.
I love that vision for the future. So then when you're advising your clients or just in general, as you're talking to executives, leaders, CHROs who are coming to you with the latest problems to solve these days, what are you hearing? What is top of mind? Is it top of mind to make work more human? Or what are the problems that executives or teams are struggling with in this moment?
I think that the economy has been a big topic for executive teams and how to safeguard against the unforeseen and the volatility that we've experienced. I think that's definitely what's keeping executives up at night and doing whatever they can within their control to sustain and grow their businesses. I mean, we're seeing bankruptcies happen. Companies are getting liquidated. They're not meeting their debt obligations. I think things like that, due to the volatility in the economy, are truly what's keeping top executives up at night. And I think that what that means is they're looking for ways to improve efficiencies in the business. AI is one way to achieve efficiencies. It also requires an investment, not just in technology, but also in compliance and meeting regulatory requirements to safeguard data. It requires the people change, the learning, the incentives for adoption, the behavior change on a daily basis, not just the 3 things you do this year to get better at using this tool. It's like, how are you using it every day? And then it's improving processes. So to actually maximize where in processes can you create shortcuts or streamline because you're using AI and automation. So that's a macro factor that's impacting businesses. When I talk about talent strategy in the way that I just have about how you future proof and get ready for the pendulum to swing, to me, there should always be someone in the organization or group of people that are thinking about that and not losing sight of it, even amidst volatility. I think that we live in a volatile world. I'm not sure that's going to change. I just think that's been combined with some other factors that are leading to slow growth in certain industries. And the geopolitical climate has also impacted that as well. I don't think it means that you stop thinking strategically. I think that as soon as you do that, you are at risk of being mediocre. And that's never advice that I would give anyone.
There's always the next headline, and the negative headlines will get you more clicks and views if you're on the media side. But you can't always be reactive. You need to be strategic, right, as an organization to invest at the appropriate kind of way. But you're right to call out there's real pain out there for some organizations and really trying to sort through what the future looks like. So speaking specifically to the HR function, what do you think, if you had any parting thoughts for an HR function leader to help navigate volatility Any closing thoughts for such a leader who is trying to figure out exactly how to engage with the executive team and also their team in these conversations about reskilling, workforce planning, and process shifting?
I think that HR often isn't the first to get access to some of these tools and technologies. And if I'm an HR leader, a way to stay ahead is to actually demonstrate that they're using these AI tools and they're leveraging them to create efficiencies and creating cases for why they actually work and how work can be disrupted. And I think that's one way that HR can continue to stay relevant and provide great advice to the business and continue to demonstrate how to upskill because they're upskilling, how to use the tools to create capacity because they're creating capacity, and how to reapply that capacity to generate greater value for the business because they're actually doing it. So I think they have to walk the walk, talk the talk, be using automation to do things like improve tier one employee support, let's say, or to craft job canvases. So that's one way I think HR can do that. The other is keeping one foot in the now and one always in the future and not taking for granted whatever the position it is that you hold in the market today, because someone can always compete with you for top talent. And if you wake up believing that your position could always be shaken, what is it that you can do to keep your finger on the pulse of what employees really need? I'd be thinking of more specifically, what is your employee value proposition? And have you been refining that? Are you keeping up with it? Or have we been stalled because we're focused on other priorities? And we know that employee value propositions, first and foremost, there's so many generations in the workforce. They have varying needs, and Gen Z has very specific needs that are so different than the retiring workforce, but they're all important. And are you keeping pay at pace? That's the baseline. Cost of living has risen. Have you been keeping up with cost of living? What benchmarks are you using? I think if you get that, that's foundational. And there's all sorts of things I'd say on the growth side of the equation and the perk side of the equation when it comes to employee value propositions. But on the growth side, do people feel like Gen Z wants to feel they have agency, that they have influence in the work that they're doing? They want to learn, they want to get feedback. I was chatting with someone recently about how they're using Gemini to gauge what their manager's feedback might say. So prior feedback from a manager is being put into GPT combined with feedback from, let's say, a therapist is put into GPT. And then you put it in your most recent document you've created and you say, like, act like you're my manager and that you're giving me feedback on this document. And they do it as like a first pass as a way of developing their career, right? They want real time feedback. I use that as an example of how to use tech tools to do it. But I think there's lots of other ways. There's employee programs for acknowledgement and training your leaders to be proactive about sharing feedback. They want to have opportunities to express a breadth of skills. So give them those opportunities to work on different teams, to try different projects. They want variety in their work and they want the workspace to be a place they want to go to. Atlassian's a great example of this. They've made a workplace that people go to only intentionally because they have a completely distributed workforce, but they've designed it with this mentality that's like a hotel. It's meant to be this destination. And so translate that into whatever that means for your employee value proposition within the capacity that you have in your organization. How can we make the workplace a space that people want to go to, emulates more co-working than cubicles, for example? And on the perk side, sabbaticals, people want to take more time off, not just to build a family, but to do other things, to grow as an individual, to travel, to have new experiences. And then how do you use paid time off and paid leave? Give people the flexibility to use that time when and how they decide to do it versus at specific times. And so I think that's how JAR can continue to not just help solve for what's happening today, but continue to be strategic and keep their finger on the pulse of what like the future workforce is going to need, because I don't think that future workforce that all of us are going away just because of automation. I just think that our jobs are going to change and there's going to be new jobs for us to do.
Thanks for reminding us all that HR professionals know there's a myriad of levers that you have to pull, but it's It's in good times and bad, and you need to make sure you're adjusting the pace based on what's happening with the business. But there's so many levers, as you mentioned, and if you want to stay relevant despite all the volatility, it's important to think about all of those for a given organization. Let me ask you about Thursday, and you seem to have your pulse on a lot of the trends and what's impacting the workforce. Could you just tell us a little bit about the work that you do and also how people might be able to, get in touch or follow along?
Yeah, sure. So Thursday Strategy is an insights to innovation firm focused on getting deep on human qualitative insights. So, what is it that people do, say, think, and feel? And how does that inform product development? How does that inform employee experience? How does that inform your brand, as well as quantitatively? What did the general population think about your product, your solution? What are the trends we're seeing in workforce and the general population, and what are those insights that can be brought to your business? That is what we do. We help our clients make confident and informed decisions on their strategies, whether they be workforce or product or marketing, to improve their brand. And we work with clients across the world. And we're really excited to continue on this path of building better brands for our clients. And you can get in touch by emailing me at sabrina@thursdaystrategy.com.
Well, awesome. Thank you for this great conversation, Sabrina. So we've covered a lot of ground about the overall macroeconomic trends as well as AI specifically, both for the workforce, newer generations, HR specifically. And yeah, I'm left with your thought about how it's really important to make and build on work being and feeling more human for more people all the time. And it's important to build for beyond the latest curve of volatility and not to be too reactive and think about all the levers that you have as a leadership group and certainly in the HR function. And you bring so many great examples that we can all learn from and take inspiration from, both in your work and just things that you're seeing out there in the research that will guide all of us as we think about how we can future proof our organizations and our HR functions. So, once again, thank you, Sabrina. And for everyone out there is following along, good luck to you as you continue to future proof your own organizations and hope you took something away from this one, just like I did. And I'll see you on the next one. Bye now. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Future Proof HR. If you like the discussion, make sure you leave us a 5-star review on the platform you're listening to or watching us on. Or share this with a friend or colleague who may find value in the message. See you next time as we keep our pulse on how we can all thrive in the age of AI. Hey, it's Thomas again. One quick question before you go. Are you and your HR team tired of answering the same employee questions again and again in Slack? If yes, our Cleary AI-powered Slack bot is here to help. It takes routine employee requests and answers it automatically while freeing up time for you to take on more important tasks. At the same time, it automatically builds up an HR knowledge base as you go. It's quick to set up, works right in Slack, and you can try it for free. Just head on over to gocleary.com/HR-chatbot to install it. It's again, gocleary.com/HR-chatbot. Thanks again.